Good morning and welcome to the State Water Resources Control Board Drinking Water Fee Stakeholder Meeting. Today is Wednesday, August 5th. My name is David Ceccarelli. I am the Fee Chief at the State Water Board's fee programs. And today, assisting me with this meeting is Glenn Osterhage. We also have John Russell with the Deputy Director of the Division of Administrative Services. I'd like to go over a few logistics for today's meeting. Today's meeting is being webcast, and there could be a little bit of a lag in between our presentation and what you hear. So we'll do our best to pause at times so we're able to catch up with the meeting. The meeting is also being, there's a teleconference. And the teleconference number is 1-877-402-9753. There's also a participant code, which is 907-6572. You'll find the teleconference number on the agenda of the meeting. Currently, right now, those that are participating through the teleconference number, you are muted, and during the appropriate time and at our end of when we open up the discussions, we'll go ahead and we'll unmute everyone, and then we'll have a open discussion at that point. In addition, there is a email address that's also attached, and it's on the link that it's on the agenda. We do have staff in the conference room currently that is monitoring the emails, and then during the presentation, as emails come through, we'll go ahead and answer those appropriately during that time. I just want to, again, go over the agenda here. Right now, introductions. Our second item on the agenda is our fee alternatives for the next 2 years, which is attachment 1, which is also part of the agenda. And then the open discussion, and then next steps. So just kind of a little background, kind of where we're at now. We hold these stakeholder meetings in line with the state budget process. We had a meeting in early March based on the governor's proposed budget. We had a meeting earlier in June that went in line with the May revised budget, and then the enacted budget that got signed and put into place on July 1 for fiscal year 2021. We're going to kind of go through and kind of just briefly talk about that budget and the impacts to fees for the current fiscal year that we're currently in. What I will say is, kind of throughout our process and our messaging with the drinking water fund budget, there haven't been many changes to the budget, and so most of our message that we'll talk today is similar to what we've discussed in our last couple of stakeholder meetings. So with that said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass it over to Glenn Osterhage. And Glenn's going to talk a little bit about the numbers and some of our alternatives and looking outward for the next couple of fiscal years.
All right, thank you, David. As David indicated, my name is Glenn Osterhage, Division of Administrative Services in our fee branch. Normally at this stage, we show a slide that's called the cost drivers. I chose not to include it on this one because, as David said, nothing has actually changed in this fund. The Safe Drinking Water Account is a very stable program at this time. What was proposed back in January remained in the May revised with no changes, and then got enacted through the legislature and the governor, again with no changes. So budget-wise, allocation, expenditures, everything has been consistent for the last half year for this fund. The only change is related, it actually took place after the enacted budget, is what we're calling furlough salary savings. Most people may know the governor asked to negotiate with the unions to reduce state employee salaries, turns out for 2 years. I believe most unions, I can't say one way or another if all unions have agreed to it, but most unions have agreed to reduce salaries. So those numbers are not reflected in the enacted budget. We're currently estimating what we think the impact of that salary savings will be. So with that, the numbers for the drinking water program, it's about, where am I note? $1.4 million is what we're estimating for the salary savings. So with that reduction, we can actually feel comfortable with what our fund reserve is to recommend no fee changes for the fiscal year. So those that are looking online, the one attachment we have is basically looking out to future years, what we call budget year +1, which is the next fiscal year, or budget year +2. And we have a couple of options that we'll look at through the next yearly cycle if we don't raise fees this year. The first one under option A is if we raise fees 3.6%, that will keep us in line with trying to align expenditures and revenue numbers and trying to maintain a 5 to 10% fund reserve. And then going out to budget year 2, it jumps to 9.2. I will say we have a couple of assumptions that we had to build in for our budget years. Obviously, we don't have knowledge of what will be in the budget for next year. That the proposed one will come out in January. So we estimated a few things. Budget year 1, we will still have the furlough salary savings in place, so there will be no salary increases for staff. But we did add in about a 2.5%, I call it a general increase in costs. So that's the overhead, the rent, utilities, that type of stuff. So there will be some additional costs next year, just not normally as high. That 2.5% may be a little high, but we tend to be a little more conservative when we look at our numbers. Going into budget year 2, so 2 years from now, the furlough salary savings go away. Those savings for each staff is about 9.3%. So our expenditures go up, again, the $1.4 million. And at this time, we don't know through the negotiations if there will be any type of salary increases for staff that are being deferred with the reductions. So we did add in a 3% salary increase just in case it shows up 2 years from now. It may not happen. We may not get fee increases. So that 9.2, again, it's just an estimate. And then looking at option B, over the next 2 years, if we try to balance those 2 years out to have consistent increase amounts, you're looking on the 5 to 6% range over each of the next 2 years. Ultimately, we end up with a fairly balanced budget where our revenue or expenditures are pretty close to zero, and our fund balance on this one is targeting 5%. We usually try to go a 5 to 10% range. So again, with this fund, with no changes since the proposed budget, with the furlough salary savings being added in to reduce our expenditures, right now the intent is to recommend no fee increases for this year. And then as we go through the next year's cycle, when we get the January proposed budget, we'll look at the numbers and see where we go from there. And what I don't know, and I'm actually going to look at David or John, is if we don't propose anything, we normally go to our board in September with any fee changes. So if we do go forward with no fee increases, I don't think we actually take this item to the board. Is that correct, David? We still would? Okay.
Yeah, we'll take it. We'll take it to the board. There possibly we may have some language cleanup, things like that, that we'll be working with our attorneys on. And in addition, of course, our board will want to be briefed on the status, of course, the fund, and again, kind of looking at the impacts to if we weren't to do a fee increase this year, what those impacts would look like for the next future years.
So to kind of wrap up this final talking point, obviously I would assume that most those stakeholders are probably agreeable to the fact that we're not looking to raise fees this year. Again, as we move into the next year cycle, we have some choices. Do we want to do just the minimum amount to balance out next year with a potential higher number 2 years from now? Or do we want to look to try to be consistent year over year? I think we've mentioned before, we do have some issues with our new FisCal accounting database. We are getting close to being caught up. Fiscal year 18-19 has been closed. We're waiting for some final reports, and our accounting office is currently working on the prior year, the 19-20 numbers. Hope to have that closed out by the end of the calendar year. So hopefully when we get into January, we'll be able to tie in some missing numbers as far as what our true reserve is. But again, this fund is fairly consistent, it's fairly balanced, so we're pretty comfortable with the numbers we're projecting out into the future years, but we'll be able to tie those together. So with that, I'm going to see if David has any other comments before we look to Stephanie to see if we have any email questions.
Yeah, I would just add that looking at last year and actually the year before, I know that the Safe Drinking Water account, or this fund, has had kind of what we refer to as kind of a prudent reserve going on. Although what has taken place over the last couple of years is that there has been a slight structural deficit, meaning that expenditures have been a little higher than revenue. But again, we've been able to not increase fees or minimize them, just basically based on because of that fund reserve and being able to draw that down. And as Glenn mentioned, now that we know that with the potential furlough savings, which are also going to reduce our expenditures even more than what's in the actual enacted budget, then it kind of gets us closer to where our revenues and expenditures are going to be for this year. So that's why we feel comfortable and confident that a 0% increase for this year will continue to balance this fund for the current fiscal year that we're in.
And thanks, David, because you brought up a point that I had a note here they hadn't gotten to yet. So as David said, this fund has had a healthy reserve that we've been able to draw down by having revenues be a little lower than expenditures. A few years ago, we were in the 24-25% fund reserve. A couple of years ago, we're 16-17% reserve. We're forecasting to come in at about 8.5% for this year. So we're driving it down, but because we have the structural deficit, at some point we have to look to increase fees to cover that. Not increasing fees this year, if we do get that accepted, we're forecasting about a 6.5% reserve. So again, our target is between 5 and 10%. So we're looking fine there. We're not going to go into any drastic numbers. Ultimately, we can go down a little bit, but again, we'll address that hopefully in future years. So I'm going to look at Stephanie. Do we have any email questions? Okay, she's nodding, so yeah.
So this is from Robert Gore. Good morning, David and Glenn. Since drinking
Stephanie,
water
can
is
you
a regulatory...
microphone?
Okay, let me try that again. Good morning, David and Glenn. This is from Robert Gore. Since drinking water is a regulatory focus and influx, what major programs and tasks are the drinking water fee payers supporting in FY2021? Since drinking water is a regulatory focus and in flux, what major programs and tasks are the drinking water fee payers supporting in fiscal year 2021?
So what I'm going to do is, if we can open up the microphones. I'm not sure we have any program staff that are calling in that can be able to address what staff is actually working on.
So I will say that we have oversight of the the drinking water facilities, and there's definitely the permitting, the investigations, the compliance, the monitoring, all of those aspects, along with the enforcement that goes along with the regulatory oversight of the drinking water program, and to ensure that there's safe drinking water for everyone in the state of California. So again, those are part of some of the core regulatory requirements. If there are program staff online and want to talk more details, we can definitely reach out to Bob, and if he wants further discussion on that, we can do that.
As we also wait, there is the performance metric report that we can look at that shows some of the metrics. I believe drinking water, again, my focus has always been on water quality, so I believe drinking water is included on that report, so we can kind of look to see what some of the metrics that are being tracked by the program on a yearly basis.
And if Bob is referring to SAFER, that's a separately funded program, and so Of course, these fees pay for our core programs, and then SAFER, which was implemented into the budget on July 1, completely different program and different funding source.
So Bob, either you can follow up with additional emails or just reach out to David and me directly, and we can follow up specifically with you. Okay, nothing else, Stephanie? Okay. So with that, we'll wait a moment because we do realize there is a little bit of a lag on the webcast. So additional questions may follow in as we wait. I just heard a beep over there, Stephanie. Oh. So David, anything else you want to add? So as we look to next steps, we do plan to go to our board for our fee adoptions. I believe it's September 15th is the second Tuesday or second board meeting, which is on a Tuesday. We'll take that. We also have our water quality, water rights fees that will also go at the same time. Again, unless something changes here dramatically, we will expect staff recommendation to be no fee increases this year, update the board on some of the expenditures, some of the issues with the savings, future projections, and some of the issues we have for future out years on choices on how we're going to make sure we balance revenue and expenditures on a go-forward basis, especially once the furlough salary savings get taken away and we go back to a full support. So David, anything else you want to add?
No, that's it for now. Are there any email address emails? Again, let's just wait just a couple, about one more minute on the lag and see if anything comes in. Bob is asking, is there any innovative work with SAFER offhand?
Okay, one last check for Stephanie. Anything else come in? Okay, so David, if you want to go ahead and sign us off and just follow up on our next steps, and then we'll continue.
So, as Glenn mentioned, basically our next steps is that, of course, we'll have in-house discussions with our executive management and board members on our staff's proposal. We're scheduled to take an item to the board for the drinking water fees on September 15th. As of right now, that meeting, of course, will be Zoomed. So it'll be an online Zoom meeting, and there are directions on our website to how to participate in those meetings. I will say 10 days prior to that meeting, we'll be posting our agendas, and then there'll be a comment period based on that. Let me pass it on to Glenn because Glenn has something.
Yeah, because David brought the Zoom. So our division, we know with our board meetings, they're through Zoom, through another meeting, through what we call the winery general order and fees. We're taking our first stab at doing a Zoom meeting for that fee workshop. So future meetings for this one, the next one would be probably late February, early March. We may look to have a Zoom component to this meeting to have a little more direct interaction versus the webcast. So again, we are looking to move forward with different technology. If we're still working fully remote, obviously if we come back into the office, I think it helps for those that are located remotely from Sacramento. It is a good alternative to have the Zoom and the webcast available to limit travel for a lot of individuals. But it is something we'll look at for future meetings as we get more comfortable using that new platform.
Again, just to recap, we'll be taking an item for drinking water fees to the board on September 15th for their consideration. And again, there'll be a comment period prior to that. And then as Glenn mentioned, it'll be a Zoom meeting, so there'll be an opportunity to participate. And there'll be information on the State Water Resources Control Board's website for information on how to participate in that meeting. Again, at this point, there's no additional questions. Well, if you have anything, please email the email address that's on the agenda, and Glenn and I will follow up with you. Again, we appreciate your time today. And don't hesitate to reach out to Glenn or I if you have any additional questions. Thank you.